Vladimir Putin has ordered the urgent transfer of military equipment to the border with Finland, as well as the construction of powerful fortifications on the border. In the Kremlin, Putin's spokesperson Peskov stated that Europe is frantically militarizing, disrupting peaceful dialogue on Ukraine and delaying the end of the war, and therefore Russia must prepare for a major military confrontation. Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, claimed Finland is preparing a staging ground for an attack on Russia after joining NATO, while claiming it's for defense. He says NATO is, quote, actively mastering all 5 operational domains of Finland: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. And of course, who could forget the scary stories about biological weapons? Medvedev stated that, quote, unfriendly countries are bringing into Russia plant, animal, and microorganism species that are not native to it in order to use them as weapons. And he added that the West is developing biological weapons in Ukraine and Georgia. One could laugh at this, but in Europe they warned that Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions go far beyond Ukraine. In fact, it's only just beginning with Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called on European allies to rethink their priorities and look for new partners in the context of changing relations with the United States of America. My name is Alexei Peci. Today is already September 9th. Let's talk about all of this step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this video, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So I'll start not with the statements of rabid Russians, but with the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. He stated today that Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions go far beyond Ukraine. In fact, everything is just beginning with it. That's why he called on European allies to rethink their priorities and seek new partners amid changing relations with the United States. Here's a quote from Merz. We in Europe must adjust our interests without false nostalgia. Although the United States remains an important ally, Washington now makes cooperation dependent on specific interests and conditions. His position was supported by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who previously called Putin a predator who will not stop in Ukraine. Here is her quote. Putin's intermediaries have been attacking our society for years with hybrid and cyber attacks, turning migrants into a weapon and undermining Ukraine's defense. We must take greater responsibility for our own security, she said, reminding about the European Union's launched plan for the development of the defense industry worth 800 billion euros. And now the concerns of European leaders are confirmed by concrete measures. As it became known earlier, the French government instructed hospitals across the country to prepare for the scenario of a major conflict by March 2026. According to Le Figaro, the regional health agency received instructions to prepare for the mass admission of wounded servicemen, both French and allied NATO personnel. Mark Rutte previously warned that Russia could be ready to attack the alliance within 5 years. Danish intelligence gives an even more pessimistic forecast. A local conflict with a neighboring country is possible within just 6 months, and in 2 to 3 years Moscow could threaten one or several NATO countries. And today Moscow has openly started threatening Europe with war in its usual manner. After joining NATO, Finland is preparing a staging ground for an attack on Russia, claiming it's for defense. Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council Dmitry Medvedev made this statement. According to Medvedev, the North Atlantic Alliance is fully involved in these matters and is now actively mastering all 5 operational environments. Suomi is the name of Finland in Finnish: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. In particular, a headquarters structure for NATO's forward land forces is being established in close proximity to the Russian border, and the number of troops could be increased to a full brigade of 5,000 personnel, Medvedev stated. He also mentioned the deployment of a NATO regional land forces command headquarters in the city of Mikkeli and the establishment of a new garrison in the settlement of Ivalo, which is located 40 kilometers from Russian territory. Medvedev accused Finnish President Alexander Stubb of pushing the country toward military conflict, adding that the desire to profit at Russia's expense has been instilled in the Finnish mindset. Medvedev stated that Vladimir Putin has given instructions to strengthen the border with Finland. At a meeting with local officials, Medvedev announced the construction of fortifications in all border areas. And here we need to figure out who is taking retaliatory actions and who is being more aggressive. Since September 1, a NATO Land Forces Regional Command headquarters has indeed started operating in the Finnish city of Mikkeli, which is located just 140 kilometers from the Russian border. At the initial stage, about 10 officers will work there, with the number increasing to 50 people later. 50 people in the future is a huge threat to Russia. The new structure is under the command of NATO Norfolk in the United States. It will be responsible for managing the alliance's ground forces in the northern region, coordinating the actions of national armies, as well as joint planning of exercises and operations. And this very episode is what the Kremlin calls an act of aggression, which allegedly indicates that NATO is preparing an attack on Russia from the territory of Finland. And that's why Putin has a reason to move troops to the border. Well, if for Russians this is a pseudo-ray and the logic is clear, then we need to figure it out a bit ourselves. The fact is that the creation of a NATO headquarters in Mikkeli was a response to Russian actions on the border with Finland. The fact is that back in May of this year, that is 3 months ago, it became known that active construction was being observed in the Russian border areas with Finland. New shelters for fighter jets, weapons depots, military equipment, as well as dozens of soldiers. All this indicates the redeployment of significant forces. NATO then confirmed that such activity looks like strategic preparation for a new deployment of troops. And back in the spring, it became known that Russia was increasing its capabilities at key points, Kamenka, Alakurti, as well as near Estonia. And so, in response to these actions by the Russians, NATO created a headquarters in Finland. At the same time, the press secretary of the President of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Peskov, stated that the countries of the European Union are complicating the peaceful dialogue on Ukraine and prolonging the end of the war. And as an example, he cited the words of the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, about the need to turn Ukraine into a steel porcupine that no enemy would be able to digest. And further, I will quote Peskov, European countries are taking, to put it in Russian, quite an aggressive stance. What is this? Using Cold War cliches, this is clear European militarism. This European stance doesn't help but actually makes settlement efforts harder. The root causes of the special military operation were already understood worldwide. And of course, all of President Putin's efforts to explain and clarify this to his counterparts are bearing fruit. More and more countries understand us. And what's noteworthy is that the countries of the European Union, as part of security guarantees for Ukraine, are indeed discussing turning Ukraine into something like a porcupine. This is a strategy known as the Israeli or South Korean model, which is supposed to help Kyiv take a position of strength to avoid the resumption of hostilities after a ceasefire. It involves creating a multi-layered and highly effective defense system, primarily with the help of the armed forces of Ukraine. 26 countries in the coalition are ready to help Kyiv build it, and in particular, some of them may send their military personnel to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian army. But Russia is foaming at the mouth, shouting that it will not allow this, which is creating all the conditions for new Russian aggression, this time against Europe. And finally, I'll mention another insane statement by Medvedev. After all, it looks like a marker, because we heard similar nonsense right before Russia's attack. Medvedev stated that unfriendly countries might bring into Russia unusual types of plants, animals, and microorganisms to use them as weapons. He noted that among the organisms not typical for Russia's climate zone are pathogens of serious infectious diseases, pest insects, weeds, and aquatic creatures. According to Medvedev, their spread leads to pandemics, allergies, animal deaths, crop losses, a reduction in forest and hunting resources, and also causes economic damage. Well, apparently, so that Medvedev doesn't look completely crazy. The president of the Kurchatov Institute and close friend of the dictator Putin, Mikhail Kovalchuk, stated that the West is conducting experiments to create biological weapons in psychiatric hospitals in Ukraine and Georgia. Kovalchuk claims that after the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapsed, Americans took over sanitary and epidemiological stations in former Soviet republics to access local strain and microorganism collections, in order to create epidemic viruses for specific regions of Russia and disguise the use of such biological weapons as natural processes. Well, that's why, according to this Kovalchuk, it's urgent to seize all these dangerous laboratories in order to stop the biological threat to Russia. I'll leave it at that, friends. Share your opinions and conclusions about all this Russian nonsense in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.